Hello guys, here's Lagom Rodan, graphic designer and video editor. This is a video in the Re-Edit series where I showcase my editing skills. Feel free to like, share, comment and subscribe if you want to see more of this. Without further talk, let's dive into the Re-Edit of the day.
Although it's hard to predict the future, and no one can guarantee an individual person with multiple sclerosis will have a mild course of illness, based on observational studies, the following factors are associated with an on average lower risk of disability. Citations below. Number 1. The initial symptoms. For people whose early symptoms of MS are visual symptoms, as in with optic neuritis, or sensory symptoms, as in numbness or tingling, this has been associated with a lower long-term risk of disability compared to other early symptoms such as weakness of the body, clumsiness or imbalance, or bladder dysfunction. For instance, in this study, people who had their first attack as optic neuritis had less brain lesions on average and a lower risk of subsequent relapses. Number 2, good recovery from attacks. So if someone has an attack but recovers completely or nearly completely, that's linked to a better prognosis. For instance, if someone has optic neuritis but vision returns to normal, or transverse myelitis and the numbness and weakness goes away over time, as opposed to having residual symptoms that persist permanently. For example, in this study, the number of incomplete recoveries from relapses, 0, 1, 2, or 3 or more, was strongly linked to disability. Disability is measured here on the y-axis with the EDSS scale, which is Expanded Disability Status Scale, a measure of disability in MS research, and I'll refer to it throughout this presentation. Number 3, fewer attacks early in the disease. So let's say someone has an attack like optic neuritis and then no subsequent relapses for 5 or 10 years. That's highly favorable as opposed to someone who has several attacks within the first few years of disease onset. Another way to say this would be a long gap between the first and second attack. For instance, in this study, people who had only one relapse in the first few years of diagnosis, their median time to develop secondary progressive MS, or a slow worsening of disability after an initial diagnosis of relapsing MS, was 20 years. But for people who had 3 or more attacks early in the disease, it was only 15 years, a 5-year difference. Interestingly, relapses seem to have a lower correlation with long-term disability later in the disease, especially in people who already have progressive MS. It seems that the timing and severity of the slow, insidious progression is more prognostic than individual relapses in people with progressive MS.